Hey everyone, I'm going to quickly walk through how to create online tables for Databricks inside of Databricks using Delta tables as the base, as well as deploying the feature serving endpoint to expose the online table as a REST API. So for the two things that you install is the latest version of Databricks SDK, and you want the Databricks feature engineering SDK as well installed. So we're going to take the line item TPCH dataset, move that to an online table, and expose that as a feature serving endpoint. First step is let's just take a look at the data. This is kind of what the row of data looks like. The primary key is basically a composite of the order key, part key, supplier key, and line number key. And this is basically a standard set of line items in order. So first we want to create the delta table. This is the source. I'm just making a target delta table where this data is going to get written to. Here I have my 4 primary keys. You want to make sure that they're not null. And I want to create my constraint for the primary key. And then I also want to make sure I enable change data feed on, so that if I down the line, if I want to incrementally ingest data, I have the option to do so. And DLT is going to facilitate that. So I create the online table. Then I'm just going to make sure there's no data in there. In my case, I'm doing a truncate and load. Another common scenario where you do truncate and load is for recommendation use cases. If you recompute all the recommendations, you'll do a truncate and load. Here, I'm just inserting all of the line items, describing the history, just to make sure I have history in my table. And then we're going to need 3 things. We're going to need the source table that we just made. It's called tree test line item. Then we're going to need an online table that we create. Then we're going to need a feature serving spec. So this is basically like a function that you serve on a feature serving endpoint. And we also need to declare all of our primary keys. So these are our 4 primary keys. So first thing first, we're going to create, we already entered data into the delta table. We're going to then create the online table. So there's 2 components. You need to make the online table and the online table spec. So the key fields here are the primary key columns, which are composed of these 4 columns. It's important that the online table knows it's going to be an OLTP system, so it needs to know what the primary keys are. You need a source table name. And in this case, it's just going to be tree test line item. You want perform full copy equals true because initially it's not going to have any data, and we want the snapshot to be loaded all at once. And then in our case, we're going to do triggered once. In the future, I'll go over the different different modes for online tables. There's typically 3. There's a snapshot, triggered, and continuous. We'll kind of go over that in detail later. For now, I'm going to do a snapshot indicated by the full copy, and then it's going to be triggered, so it's not going to be always running. And here I just create the spec. I create the spec and wait. And here I'm just looking at that. The only 2 things that you really care about here is the table object. It'll have all details, and then the pipeline ID. Pipeline ID is important because that's a DLT pipeline that will either do a full snapshot update, like a trigger update, or a continuous update. So it's important to know what the pipeline ID is. In our case, we can run this whenever we want. Here, I could do a full pipeline refresh, and it will trigger and kick off another pipeline. So let's take a quick run at that. And I already have the table loaded. And the unique thing about a full refresh or snapshot is the data in the table is still available. This is an atomic cutover to the new data set. So in the recommendation use case, your system is still always going to be up till this pipeline update finishes, and then all of the records will populate with the new data. That's important to note for this. Once you trigger that, in the catalog, when you go to the online table, you'll kind of see it's waiting for resources. And further down the line, once the DLT job is up and running, it will then indicate how many rows it's processed. So here we have, so the next thing you do is once the online table is there and you've loaded data into it, you're going to then create a feature serving spec. So in Unity Catalog, this is just treated as a function. To create the feature serving spec, you need to import the client. You need to make sure MLflow is set to UC. And here I'm just deleting it if it already exists. You need a name for the spec. So it's going to be a UC function. So just come up with a new name. And then for the lookup, you need to provide the primary keys in which the user is going to query and the table name that is the source table name. Since this is used for both offline and online, the source table name is not going to be the online table, but the actual source table name. And keep in mind, in Databricks, you can only create one online table off of a source delts table because it's just one-to-one mapping. There's really no reason to have more than one online table mapping to one Delta table. And this feature engineering client is able to tie to the online table using the source table name. And the primary keys is basically how you query the data. So once you have the spec defined, you can create that. It's going to basically save that as a unicatalog function. If we go here and I just type in the suffix, which is Sri test line item, you'll kind of see online line item and line item spec. This is basically what the function spec looks like. Once you create that, you basically are then going to create a model serving endpoint using the feature spec. You can pick the size of the endpoint you want. They're small, medium, large, and then custom sizes are available to you as well. You just have to reach out to your Databricks representative. And then you can also set scale to 0 or scale not to 0. And this is basically going to give you a URL at the end of the day. And once you get the endpoint name, you can use the Databricks SDK. There's an active bug with the SDK. The request will go through, but you're going to get no results. The results don't follow the predictions spec that we have for MLflow. So what you actually have to do is use the API client instead of the serving endpoints query. It's just something important. Even though you'll see this, you'll see that it has 0 choices. The way to get around this is to use the API client, and this is the path to the endpoint name. And then this is the structure of the request. You have to provide data frame records, and then you have to provide the values for the primary keys. Keep in mind, you can pass in multiple. You can pass in things like this, and you'll get multiple results back for each record. It does support this, but you can only query by the lookup keys that you provided. That is the major caveat to this. So in the catalog, this is what the spec will look like. This is what the online table will look like. You'll kind of see that now records are being passed in. You'd think if it's doing a snapshot, it should do a truncate and load. Otherwise, it's going to get the number of records wrong. But I can still query this data, even though it's still processing. It's an atomic cutover, which means that your current data is still going to be available to you. And this is super critical for always having uptime on your data set. And if you need to handle more concurrency, the way you would scale this is to go to your serving endpoint, which is this here. And you can edit the serving endpoint. You can do it programmatically as well. You can change from small, medium to large, and reach out to your Databricks representative if you need something custom here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to go from the top again, just to summarize. You need to make sure you install the SDK, feature engineering client. You need to make sure you have your Delta table. Try to make sure all your primary keys are set to not null. Set your primary key constraint. Enable change data feed. Insert data into the data set. And then once your table has data in it, you're then going to create your online table. You're going to have to decide on the mode that you want and whether you want the initial full snapshot or not. And then you're going to want to know about your DLT pipeline. So if you want to do a full refresh, incremental refresh, it's kind of up to you. You just need to start an update on the pipeline. And then to make sure that your features are accessible through an API using feature serving, you need to create the feature serving spec, feature serving spec, and then deploy that as a serving endpoint and make sure you pick the right size for that. And you can query it using the Databricks SDK by doing the API client.do.